welcome to the program. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. The Moroccan government is trying to figure out how at least 19 people died after drinking toxic alcohol at a roadside shop in the country's northern city of Qasr El Kabir. Local media reports that dozens of other people were taken to hospital in critical condition, with 2 in intensive care. One 48-year-old man has been arrested in connection to the incident, and police say they've recovered at least 50 litres of the alcohol at his store. Selling alcohol to Muslims is forbidden in Morocco, but is often discreetly sold in restaurants and stores. In August, 8 people died after drinking contaminated alcohol in the northern oriental region, and at least 20 died in July last year in a similar incident in Uja in eastern Morocco. Well, the Ugandan Health Ministry says the number of confirmed Ebola cases in the country has risen to 31, with 1 more death recorded, bringing the total number to 6 who died from the virus. The Health Ministry also says one of the 6 medical workers who tested positive with Ebola is now in critical condition. President Yoweri Museveni has defied calls by medical workers to put the Ebola-hit central region under quarantine to prevent the virus spreading to the rest of the country. Just yesterday, he said on national TV, no such measures are needed because Ebola is not airborne, and the laboratory would be set up in the virus epicenter to speed up patient testing. The World Health Organization believes the country's Ebola outbreak may have been detected late, given that the first person who had showed symptoms back in August, yet the outbreak was not declared until last September. Africa's power situation and the opportunities for investment came under spotlight at the International Trade and Investment Forum 2022, organized by the Foreign Investment Network on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York. Attending this year's event were global leaders, finance experts, and bright minds in forward-thinking solutions for Africa's perennial power problem. We'll have that report in a moment. But moving on now, one of the last main suspects in the 1994 Rwandan genocide has refused to attend the opening of his trial before a UN tribunal at The Hague. Judges, however, ruled that the case will continue. Felicien Kabuga is charged with genocide and crimes against humanity for his alleged role in the slaughter of about 800,000 people, most of them ethnic Tutsis. Once one of Rwanda's richest men, Kabuga is accused of inciting the killings through a radio station he owned and of funding and arming the militia to carry them out. He is denied the charges. Pan-Africanism has been a compelling vision for the African continent for at least 100 years as an ideology and a movement. It reflects a commitment towards greater collaboration and unity between African countries and tackling the socio-economic issues of the continent. The Mpumgubwe Institute, MISTRA for short, or the Frederick Ebert Stiftung Institute for Global Dialogue, and the National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences in South Africa hosted a conference in Pretoria, which on how to ensure Pan-Africanism remains relevant to end the marginalization of the continent from the global economy. Our correspondent Brian Pugeni reports. We'll have Pugeni's report in a minute. But 64-year-old Harry Knissen has been handed a lifetime jail sentence for plotting the genocide of black South Africans in a coup in the country. Knissen was a leader of a far-right terrorist group and had led plans to overthrow the government on November 28, 2019, using AK-47 rifles, hand grenades, and rocket launchers. The High Court in Mpumalanga heard that Knissen even wanted to use biological weapons to wipe out black people, justifying his beliefs on religious grounds, claiming that God had ordained that he should reclaim South Africa for white people. And in total, Knissen has been handed 2 life sentences plus 21 years behind bars for terrorism-related offences. And nurses in Nigeria are calling for an end to the issue of migration and the menace of brain drain in the health sector. The Director, Nursing Services, Lagos State Ministry of Health, Dorcas Shonibare, who was speaking at the maiden edition of the National Nurse Leaders Summit, says Nigeria is experiencing challenges in the sector due to a global health workers shortage.
Transforming the nursing practice for better healthcare service is the reason for this National Nurse Leader Summit in the GRA area in Ikeja, Lagos. Senior officials of the Federal and State Ministry of Health, nurses and other stakeholders are brainstorming on how best to serve the people despite the shortage of manpower.
Sustenance of biannual nursing leaders conference as a forum for harnessing ideas for professional development, encouraging higher education in nursing as a means of building nursing leaders that can withstand the competitive healthcare system and national development challenges. And this is one of them today. We are also witnessing in order to strengthen your capacity and work as leaders.
Our country and other nations of the world is experiencing challenges in planning for its workforce due to global staff shortage and migration. The nursing care in our nation clamors for a strategic plan and a policy paper that will serve as a springboard for greater progress for nursing profession in Nigeria.
Some senior health officials reiterate that the health sector is under siege and the issues must be addressed as soon as possible.
This summit is a timely one, and I noticed that the theme says transforming nursing practice through strategic planning. And I think it's time, because the whole health sector is under siege. And I think it's time that we need to plan for the health sector of today.
I know everybody's talking about the brain drain, and every day we're getting letters of resignation and people going abroad. And it's basically, for me, it's a pandemic in nursing, in healthcare right now. It's not just nurses, but also doctors.
It's hoped that deliberations reached at this summit will go a long way towards reducing the burden of brain drain and help nurses play their part in saving lives.
And as we mentioned before, Pan-Africanism has been a compelling vision for the African continent for at least 100 years. Our correspondent, Brian Pugeni, has more on this.
The theme of the conference was developing a Pan-African agenda dealing with global issues, focusing on Pan-Africanism in the context of big power rivalry, climate change, the post-COVID-19 effects, the fourth industrial revolution, and the rise in populism.
In some ways, what Mr. and our partners are forcing us to think about critically so is a new Pan-Africanism, Pan-African agenda rooted here, so that the majority of us, despite our agenda, despite our class background, that we do find resonance in the prosperity of our continent.
The panel discussion asked the question, what does a pragmatic Pan-Africanism look like given its quest for integration while struggling with its realities and challenges?
We would find that there are examples where citizens are actually more advanced than the formal processes of integration. And they actually know very little about those formal processes, because those formal processes have not done a sufficient job at actually relating and connecting with the informal, or that which is outside of the formal institutions of integration.
One of the things we have noted is that there has never been any referendum on this continent from the 1960s until now that we're speaking in any of our countries to ask our people what do they feel, what do they want in terms of this Pan-African project. There's never been. It's always been an elite-driven project.
We asked participants what expectations future bearers of Pan-Africanism can safely have as Africa confronts the global issues of today's world.
Kids, they must learn Swahili instead of learning French and whatever that they learn, Mandarin for instance. Swahili is equally important. So for me, those are basic things that we can do from a practical level. Then we can theorize later on finances, regional integration. Those things, they come secondary. Primary, we need to actually work together as Africans.
Pan-Africanism itself must be decolonized, that is refreshed, so that it becomes a more inclusive Pan-Africanism that will recognize and include the political participation of women, the economic participation of women.
Unity of purpose, one, an identity that we can take on and grasp and have ownership over this ideology. And please, our leaders just need to comply so that we can have a borderless Africa, so that we can love one another in truth and in unity, because we are so divided and the division is unnecessary.
The agreement point for many participants is that work in progress and more work still needs to be done for the continent's collective goals to be attained. From Pretoria, South Africa, Brian Pugeni, Channels Television News.
The UN mission in South Sudan, Special Representative of the Secretary General, Nicholas Haysom, has highlighted the fact that 3 recent significant developments in the implementation of the revitalized peace agreements have been made. A roadmap will enable the United Nations provide support to South Sudanese in at least 2 of the critical processes required before elections can be held. One is the preparations for elections itself, and the other is the drafting of a new constitution. A second significant development was the graduation of the first batch of the necessary unified forces. It's an important part of the security arrangements in the peace agreement, and it's ongoing, with more batches to be graduated in the coming weeks.
There is no place for sexual exploitation and abuse in the United Nations. And if you commit sexual exploitation and abuse, you will be punished. You will be held to account for your actions. And that may very well mean that you lose your job. It may also mean that there are criminal investigations against you and you may go to jail. If you see something that is wrong, you need to say something. You need to denounce it. Those who do not subscribe to the values of the United Nations need to be held to account. So yes, it's important that people that know something, they say something. If you don't, you're an accessory. Whatever level you are in the organization, whether you're a staff member, a contractor working with the organization, an implementing partner, a manager, or a leader, you have a responsibility to prevent and to report SEA when it happens.
Trial of former Guinean dictator Musa Dadis Camara and other former officials over the September 28, 2009 stadium massacre has opened in the capital, Conakry. Dozens of victims who had waited 13 years for the proceedings packed the upper galleries of the purpose-built courtroom. With crowds of journalists and officials below, they watched as Camara and 10 other former military and government officials standing trial entered the courtroom. Proceedings were broadcast live on national television. 58-year-old Camara and other defendants face litany of accusations from murder to sexual violence, kidnappings, arson and looting. Camara himself is charged with personal criminal responsibility and command responsibility over the crimes. On September 28, 2009, and in the days that followed, security forces loyal to the then junta leader slaughtered 156 people, raped at least 109 women, who had gathered for a political rally in Conakry, according to a UN-mandated report. Sierra Leone's Information Minister Mohamed Rahman Sweri has played down a comment made by the country's First Lady that her husband holds a PhD in staging military coups. Fatima Bio said at a fundraising event in the U.S. over the weekend that President Julius Maada Bio was a teacher of coups and therefore nobody could overthrow him. Her comments were a reference to protests held on August 10 in opposition strongholds over the rising cost of living and to the fact that her husband had been a part of 2 coups in the 1990s. In 1992, Mr. Bio and other junior military officers overthrew the civilian government of Joseph Seydou Momo. In January 1996, he staged a palace coup and succeeded Captain Valentine Strasser as head of state. 2 months later, he held elections and handed over to a civilian rule. Sweri said in the 1992 coup was the most popular in the history of the country because several attempts at the democratic change of government had failed. Now, Africa's power situation and opportunities for investment came on the spotlight at the International Trade and Investment Forum 2022, organized by the Foreign Investment Network on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York. Attending this year's event were global leaders, finance experts, and bright minds on forward-thinking solutions for Africa's perennial power problem. They spoke a lot about other things. And joining me now is the global advisor of Global Chamber and CEO of ONS Triumph Limited, who was at that meeting. A company he heads promotes, advocates, and supports investors. Obuna Okuku, thank you so much for joining me on the program this evening.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Omarji.
You were also one of the speakers at the International Trade and Investment Forum in New York. You not just attended, you even moderated a panel, of course. Did you feel confident that the program dealt with the major issues affecting power generation and distribution in Africa?
I would say yes, because and even more, I would say yes. It dealt with major issues associated or, that inhibit or support power generation and distribution in Africa. And even more, I say more because, listening to this session that Mike Minovich, talked about using artificial intelligence to support, the process. That was an eye-opener for me, and it's something that most leaders in Africa will begin to consider, and then you listen to the CEO of TechFied, Jack Sean. That means a lot of people have put in a lot of work trying to see how they can enhance things as far as Africa is concerned. Because without an efficient process, it becomes a bit difficult to get the power sector to work in Africa, especially in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah, and the commitment to power generation, of course, in Africa has been tied to its development. We heard from some of the speakers, one of them being Nigeria's former president, Olusegun Obasanjo, who attended virtually. And then there was the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who also advocated, for partnership with Africa, as this would help with development on the continent. What really is Africa's trajectory now when it comes to power generation? We're looking to the future. You mentioned trying to remember his name now, Chetan, who talked about artificial intelligence and, what
Mike
that...
Minovich.
Yeah, exactly. And all of those people also talked about, the future of Africa and where artificial intelligence falls in. What trajectory is Africa on right now as regards power generation and distribution?
Now, for me, I was a bit more impressed with the representative of the Minister of Power, Nigerian Minister of Power. He said something that was really, I was really impressed with, because see, investors don't have time to waste. Being able to have all the long processes of trying to get power generation license, how they have been able to streamline some of these processes, I was very impressed because, and if you notice, most of the investors who were seated there, were all, surprised to hear that now the government is taking up the position of, let me go around getting the evacuation corridor sorted, getting the EIA sorted, make sure that it becomes a plug-and-play approach. So if you're an investor, all you need to just come with your money, they hand over everything to you, the site is ready. So because, these were the things that used to make investors a little bit weary, because you don't want to come and provide power in a nation where even the guarantees for you to even sell the power becomes a problem, because power is not something that you can and put on the shelf, that if you can't sell it in Nigeria, you can take it to Ghana. No, power is something that there has to be a power distribution agreement where if I am generating power, you should be able to distribute and I should be able to get my money back. So if all these things are being streamlined and the processes are being streamlined, so I'm really very impressed. So if that can happen in Nigeria, that means it can also happen in other parts of Africa. So putting that together with the artificial intelligence, trying to streamline the processes when it comes to enhancing how things are done in Africa, I believe that there's a great future for Africa when it comes to power. And being that we need Africa, we need power to develop, development cannot happen without power in Africa.
Indeed. So what really is a major problem with generating power in Africa?
Like I said earlier, investment in power is like every other investment in all over the world. There's this big chessboard over $900 billion on the investment chessboard. Everybody is advocating, everybody's looking for that same monies globally. So the way you're looking for the money in Africa, that's how Europeans are looking, South America, everybody's pursuing these same funds. So for me, investment is like water, it flows to areas of least resistance. So if you have been able to streamline your process, it makes it easier for an investor to be comfortable where you are or want to come and do business in your client. Investors are natural resource seeking or human resource seeking. So when you have natural resources, they are attracted to you. Now again, the investors are also market seeking. So look at our population, especially in Nigeria. You have over 200 million people. But the population is not just because they're looking for a huge amount of people. They are looking at people who have the capacity, who have the financial capacity to actually purchase or to support whatever they are doing. So that means they're looking for markets. So number 3 thing that they're always looking for is they're looking for strategic assets to invest in, government strategic assets, because these are places where they're a bit more comfortable. They're not starting greenfield. These are already existing projects that they will now, jump into it, bring in their funds, and then, like the refineries you have in Nigeria that are not working well. So people that have the know-how, they have the capital, they can come in and then take over and then run it efficiently, and then from there increase. But this is the key. This is the real issue. The real issue is you have a denominator, which is the 4th thing that investors look for: efficiency in the system. So you can have all the resources, you have all of that, and then if there's no efficiency in your system, they will draw back, they will move back, because they don't have the time to come and wait to navigate within your system. So we're looking at your tax regime, how easy it is to get licenses to do business. So I mean, just like every other investment. So power, those are the things that inhibit people trying to do business when it comes to power. The evacuation corridor, have you sorted it? Is DCN ready to take up whatever you are generating and all of that? So that's particular cycle. So that's actually where we are.
You've actually given us a wonderful summary, of that conference, which unfortunately we couldn't see on the program, but I assure our viewers we will on The World Today. Thank you so much, Ogbonna, for joining us on the program.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Amarachi.
Very quickly before we close, Guinea's oldest chimpanzee and one of the last members of the globally famous endangered community has died in solitude around the age of 71. According to Environment Ministry, Afana, as she was known, a female chimp born around 1951, was part of a troop that gained global fame for uncanny abilities to use tools. And that's the program. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Rani.